In a candid interview with the New Statesman, Zack Polanski spoke again about his past critical comments of Jeremy Corbyn when he was Labour leader. Now, we've covered this before on our show, but the New Statesman gives us a quick reminder. When Corbyn was opposition leader in 2018, Polanski tweeted that as a pro-European Jew, he had two reasons I couldn't vote for Labour under Jeremy Corbyn. Polanski now regrets this remark. I've apologised to Jeremy privately about that. In fact, he now believes complaints of anti-Semitism were weaponised to damage Corbyn. I say this now as a Jewish party leader, where there's constant accusations of anti-Semitism towards me, he says. I take anti-Semitism really seriously, so when there is anti-Semitism that needs to be dealt with robustly. But I've undoubtedly seen lots and lots of examples, particularly reported in the press, where it's very clearly criticism of the Israeli government and the ongoing genocide in Gaza, and isn't anti-Semitism. He goes on to say he says he feels some guilt for being, as he puts it, another voice that I think was being unfair at the time. When I see a man who's been an anti-racist campaigner most of his life, and I don't just think it passes, I just don't think it passes the smell test to believe that he's an anti-Semite. Now, look, there are those who watch our show who still feel skeptical. I mean, I've seen some comments from viewers who are still quite annoyed by those comments. I mean, those happened back in 2018. But as I said when we first covered it, I think his experience of anti-Semitism for calling out Israel has made him reflect. I mean, he's been called a self-hating Jew, for example. Really disgusting stuff. And materially, what's important is the Green Party's policy on Israel, which is to stop sending arms to them and calling the slaughter of Palestinians, well, it truly is, a genocide. But the Labour Party has suddenly jumped on this. Zack Polanski's rewriting of history is downright offensive and completely wrong, Labour says. Anna Tully MP, Labour Party chair, said Labour has a proud tradition as an anti-racist party, but under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, we endured the most shameful period in our history, and the Equalities Watchdog found that we had acted unlawfully in our discrimination and harassment of the Jewish community. For Polanski to dismiss that as a propaganda shows his own determination to court the worst of the worst into his own ranks. Keir Starmer booted the anti-Semites out of the Labour Party when he became leader. The Greens have now opened their arms to them. The contrast could not be clearer. And look, from the beginning of this channel, actually, I think the first ever video that was uploaded was talking about Jeremy Corbyn's suspension from the Labour Party. So we have long covered the weaponisation of anti-Semitism, and it feels like I'm on repeat, but it's absolutely disgraceful to try and weaponise it once again. And again, Zack Polanski is the current only Jewish leader of a political party. And she's gaslighting everyone, saying, well, do you know what? Keir Starmer kicked out all the anti-Semites. I mean, we remember in 21, I believe, that famous video where he says, there's the door, you can leave. But he didn't kick out the anti-Semites. What he did was kick out loads of people who were critical of Israel, loads of people who supported Palestinians, and guess what? He kicked out loads of Jewish people who were critical of Israel. How's that for dealing with anti-Semitism? Zack now understands that anti-Semitism weaponisation is extremely prevalent in British politics, whilst taking genuine cases of anti-Semitism seriously.
I am concerned about the rising anti-Semitic attacks. We saw arson attacks on ambulances, for instance, and we know that increasingly Jewish communities are feeling unsafe. Now, there's a conversation to be had about whether it's a perception of unsafety or whether it's actual unsafety, but neither are acceptable. As a politician, as a leader of a political party, it's really important that we do everything we can to make sure people are both physically safe and have the perception of safety. And it's unacceptable for anyone in this country to be feeling unsafe if they're just going about their daily business.
I don't think that's controversial. I mean, he says where there are cases of anti-Semitism physically, in the sense that if you face an anti-Semitic attack, that should be dealt with. But also, there is something which we know, which is, I now call it the weaponization of anti-Semitism industry, in which Zionists, pro-Israel people in the media are weaponizing it, and it makes Jewish people feel scared. So, like, the fear of anti-Semitism is also very real, even though the source of it is completely bogus. And that's what Zack's saying. He's saying, actually, maybe we should stop, drumming up the fear of anti-Semitism where it doesn't exist because it harms the Jewish community. I think those comments were absolutely fine. Of course, Keir Starmer responded to those comments and he said this.
I think it's disgraceful for anybody to suggest otherwise. This is very real, it's visceral, and it's felt throughout the whole community. And anybody denying or belittling that is guilty of all the usual assumptions in relation to anti-Semitism. It's really important. I have no doubt in my mind about just how real this is and the impact it's having. You have families and individuals who are worried about whether they can wear their traditional clothing and jewellery in public, whether they have to hide their identity. That is very, very real. You have people who've been subjected to an attack in this very synagogue who are clearly feeling very fearful. And I think it's disgraceful for anybody to suggest otherwise.
I don't think he should be saying anything about jewellery. It wasn't too long ago that Shabana Mahmood threatened to take jewellery off of refugees, which people made the comparison, and I don't think it's unfair, to say that the Nazis literally did this. So I don't think he has a leg to stand on. Of course, then he goes on to basically smear Zack Polanski. It's also worth noting that there was a recent attack at a mosque. A man came in and threatened to kill Muslims in there. But we didn't hear anything. Nothing from Keir Starmer, did we? Now, I know it was only last week that we showed this, but again, it's still incredibly relevant. Jewish members of the UK's Labour Party are almost 13 times more likely to be expelled for supporting prescribed left-wing groups than non-Jewish members. Jewish Voice for Labour, now Jewish Voice for Liberation, also said that Jewish members of the party are 6 times more likely to come under investigation for anti-Semitism than non-Jews. Now, appreciate that article was written by Richard Sanders, one of the directors of the Labour Files. That was written years ago, but this was around the time where, once again, Keir Starmer, with that famous clip, says, "There's the door you can leave." And within that, he kicked out loads of Jewish people who had a different line on what the border deputies had. So I don't think, again, when it comes to anti-Semitism, Labour have anything to say. Harriet, what do you make of this intervention from Labour?
What do I make of this intervention from Labour, Curtis? Well, I'll just draw your attention back to a line from the statement from the Labour Party chair. Under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, we endured the most shameful period in our history. This is the sort of offensive, tone-deaf statement that could only come from a Labour Party chair. The most shameful period in Labour Party history is now. It's right now when the grown-ups in the room, the so-called grown-ups being back in charge, have turned Labour into the genocide paedophile party. They have not just been complicit in Israel's genocide in Gaza, they have been an active participant, as was highlighted in Corbyn's Gaza Tribunal report, which was released a couple of weeks ago. We're currently still in this ongoing, rolling psychodrama scandal where the Prime Minister was trying to find plum diplomatic jobs for 2 friends of paedophiles. And in Peter Mandelson's case, Starmer succeeded and is now reaping the consequences. And this shows no sign of going away. And in the case of Matthew Doyle, who is the former Starmer comms chief, he got to be a member of the House of Lords instead. The most shameful period in Labour Party history, I repeat, is now. Again, maybe it was like a shameful chapter, but because of how a decent anti-racist politician, Corbyn, who literally committed his entire career to public service, was treated, and how the British public were cheated out of a Labour government under an actually socialist Prime Minister. Labour's really lost the argument on this. And the smears aren't washing this time because now we have a Jewish man in charge of a political party, the Greens, and it just looks increasingly ridiculous for non-Jews like Starmer to try and explain what anti-Semitism is to him. It's genuinely not washing.
Yeah, in terms of Zack's comments, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time in the past, right? These are tweets from years ago. But he did say, like, you know, I'm a pro-European Jewish man. I can't vote for the Labour Party. And again, he's apologised for them. He's apparently said sorry to Jeremy, like, privately. Do you think most people think he's sincere in what he says today?
I can't like comment on what most people think or like what's actually in Zack Polanski's head, like how he might actually feel. But I think we should judge him on what he does. And under Polanski, the Greens are an anti-Zionist party that stand with Palestine. Polanski said he was lost in the propaganda over the Corbyn years, and I think it's fair to give him a chance to like repair that and to take those comments about him being sorry and about him having a different view now at face value. And I know that Corbyn's been very magnanimous about it and has like welcomed that apology from Zack. And if we can come to a place where the Greens and your party are making certain agreements and they are maybe deciding not to stand candidates in certain areas where one would have a chance of winning so as not to split the vote, I think that can only be a really good thing.
No, I completely agree. And I think what matters is record. You know, as I was saying earlier, materially, the Green Party's policy on Israel is better than anyone else at the moment. I mean, Labour's party policy is literally just support a genocide. So I think that's important. But